Did you know that approximately 15 million Africans experienced forced displacement from their homes, consigned to a life of servitude? Shockingly, the average life expectancy of an enslaved person was only about 20 years. Slavery is a dark stain on human history, a system of exploitation and oppression. Enslaved women bearing the brunt of sexual exploitation and abuse, their bodies were treated as commodities, and their children torn from their arms to be sold as property. Over the course of 4 centuries, an estimated 12 to 15 million Africans were forcibly removed from their homes, subjected to unimaginable horrors, and sold into a life of servitude. From Mesopotamia to ancient Egypt, capturing individuals in warfare for forced labor became the norm. The Mesopotamian Code of Hammurabi 1750 BC codified slavery, outlining the rights of both slaveholders and the enslaved. Debt bondage further tightened the chains on individuals in societies like Mesopotamia and Egypt, where people were forced into servitude to settle economic debts. In ancient Egypt, around 3100 BC, a staggering 20% of the population might have been enslaved, their labor vital in sectors like agriculture and the construction of monumental structures like the Great Pyramid. Moving to ancient Greece, the number of slaves surpassed free citizens, reaching about 1/3 of the population in Athens during the 5th and 4th centuries BCE. In the Roman Empire, slavery reached unprecedented levels, with up to 1/3 of certain regions' populations enslaved. Roman law solidified slaves as property, granting their owners extensive legal control over their lives. In the mid-14th century Ottoman Empire, Sultan Mehmed II established the first Ottoman slave market in Constantinople, succeeding the former Byzantine slave market. In the early 18th century, the Crimean Khanate, trading with the Ottoman Empire, exported around 2 million slaves from Russia and Poland-Lithuania between 1500 and 1700. Kaffa in Crimea emerged as a key trading port and slave market, where slaves were openly displayed naked for potential buyers. The Transatlantic Slave Trade stands as one of the most horrifying chapters in human history. For over 400 years, millions of Africans were forcibly captured, transported across the Atlantic Ocean, and subjected to a life of unimaginable cruelty and exploitation. European powers, driven by the insatiable demand for labor in their colonies, established a brutal system of human trafficking that resulted in the deaths of untold numbers. The transatlantic slave trade operated for centuries, with the first recorded African slaves arriving in the Americas in 1502. The trade reached its peak in the 18th century, during which an average of 80,000 slaves were forcibly transported annually. By the time the trade was abolished in the 19th century, millions had lost their lives or been condemned to a life of unspeakable cruelty. Enslaved individuals were subjected to unimaginable physical and emotional torture. Ships carrying enslaved Africans were often overcrowded and unsanitary, leading to widespread disease and death, with enslaved individuals crammed into tight spaces, often chained together in unsanitary and overcrowded conditions. The lack of proper hygiene and medical care led to the rapid spread of diseases such as dysentery and smallpox. Mortality rates during the Middle Passage were shockingly high, with historians estimating that approximately 2 million enslaved Africans died during the journey due to diseases, malnutrition, and brutal treatment by ship crews. Anthony Johnson, a black tobacco farmer, holds the distinction of being among the first legal slave owners in American history. Formerly an indentured servant turned free Negro, Johnson's ownership of servant John Casser was legally sanctioned in a pivotal 1654 court case, marking an early legal endorsement of slavery beyond criminal punishment. Manik Ambar was an Ethiopian military leader who established the state of Ahmednagar in India. Ambar was born into an aristocratic family in Ethiopia and was well educated in both military and political matters. He was captured by Portuguese slave traders and taken to India, where he was sold into slavery. Ambar rose through the ranks of the Mughal army and eventually became a general. In 1607, Ambar founded the state of Ahmednagar, which became a powerful force in South India. Dred Scott and Harriet Scott were an enslaved African-American couple who sued for their freedom in the landmark Supreme Court case of Dred Scott v. Sanford. The Supreme Court ruled against Scott in 1857, declaring that black people, whether enslaved or free, were not citizens of the United States and therefore had no rights to sue. The court also ruled that Congress could not regulate slavery in the territories. The Dred Scott decision was a major victory for pro-slavery forces. Sexual abuse of enslaved people was a pervasive and horrific aspect of slavery throughout history. Margaret Garner was an enslaved woman born in Kentucky in 1833. She was sold to a slave trader when she was 16 years old and was eventually purchased by John Whitehead, a tobacco planter. Garner was forced to work in the fields and was subjected to physical and sexual abuse. In 1856, Garner and her 4 children escaped to Ohio, a free state. However, they were captured by slave catchers. She killed one of her daughters to prevent her from slavery. She was sentenced to death, but she was never executed because she was pregnant at the time because of sexual assault by her enslaver. Instead, she was sold back to Whitehead, who continued to abuse her. Celia, a young woman enslaved by Robert Newsom in Missouri, endured years of sexual abuse at his hands. In 1855, when Newsom attempted to rape her once again, Celia fought back, killing him in self-defense. However, in a society that denied enslaved women basic rights and protections, Celia was arrested and charged with murder because the prosecution maintained that she had no right to resist her owner, regardless of his actions, and she was sentenced to death. Anarcha, Betsy, and Lucy, 3 enslaved women who were subjected to medical experiments by Dr. J. Marion Sims, a 19th-century gynecologist. Sims conducted numerous surgeries on them without anesthesia, using them as subjects to perfect his surgical techniques for repairing vesicovaginal fistulas. These surgeries involved creating a hole between the bladder and vagina and were excruciatingly painful. The exploitation and sexual abuse of these women for medical experimentation underscore the dehumanizing cruelty that characterized the institution of slavery. In many societies, the status of children born into slavery was automatic. This meant that they were considered the property of their parents' enslaver. In the United States, the legal principle of partus sequitur ventrum ensured that these children were also enslaved, perpetuating the cycle of bondage through generations. In the U.S., an estimated 4 million children were born into slavery between 1662 and 1865. Thomas Jefferson, the 3rd President of the United States, was accused of fathering 6 children with Sally Hemings, an enslaved woman he owned. While Jefferson never acknowledged the relationship publicly, DNA evidence has confirmed that he was likely the father of Hemings' children. Pata Seca was a nickname given to Roque Joseph Florencio, a man who was enslaved in Brazil in the 19th and 20th centuries. He was known for his height, strength, and fertility. He was forced to father over 200 children with different enslaved women, who were then sold or exploited by his owner. He was also a horse caretaker and a messenger. He died in 1958 at the age of 130 from tetanus. Despite the power imbalance, enslaved individuals displayed resilience, sparking revolts like the Haitian Revolution in 1791 and Nat Turner's Rebellion in 1831. These uprisings faced brutal reprisals, including mass executions and harsher slave codes, intensifying slavery's dehumanizing nature. In the 19th century, the fight against slavery gained momentum, propelled by activists like William Wilberforce, Harriet Tubman, and Frederick Douglass. Despite setbacks and resistance from those profiting from the exploitative system, abolitionists' determination and increasing public awareness gradually led to slavery's abolition worldwide. This century marked a turning point in the U.S., where the abolitionist movement gained momentum. Widespread support culminated in the 13th Amendment's passage in 1865, formally abolishing slavery in the United States.